Hi everyone. I am your author, Jane. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. Heat shimmered above the cracked earth as Wade Colton topped the rise, Willow Bend unfurling below like a discarded hand of cards. From his vantage, the town seemed to sigh. Buildings slumped under the pitiless sun, paint flaking like old parchment. His mount, a tired Appaloosa answering to the name horse, rasped, each breath a heavy testament to their shared ill fortune. Willow Bend wasn't on any map Wade intended to follow. Few places were. But Horse, with the stubborn conviction of a seasoned traveler, had declared an end to their journey, collapsing dramatically just shy of the welcome sign. He urged Horse onward, the animal responding with a grudging shuffle. Willow Bend offered little to entice. A mercantile, its awning tattered and bleached. A silent smithy, forge dark. A saloon, its bat wings groaning in the breeze like a fretful spirit. Wade's stomach answered with a cavernous rumble, echoing an emptiness that had become a permanent resident. He needed sustenance. Horse needed reprieve, and he craved a draught strong enough to scour the dust from his soul. He rode into town, drawing glances, faces etched with a blend of wariness and curiosity. A newcomer was a rare commodity in Willow Bend. He ignored their stares, eyes scanning the baking street, seeking a spark, a sign of life amidst the desolation. Then his gaze snagged. A woman knelt before a small, whitewashed cottage, a vibrant explosion of wildflowers crowding a makeshift garden. 2 children, a boy and a girl, clung to her skirts, faces smudged with earth, eyes bright with mirth. She patched a torn dress, brow creased in concentration, her fingers nimble and graceful, a surprising contrast to the rugged landscape. Hair the color of liquid gold haloed her face, a face both resilient and tender, bearing the weight of responsibility and the glimmer of unyielding optimism. Wade checked Horse, captivated. He hadn't experienced this stillness in years. A soft resonance vibrated within, a forgotten chord strumming back to life. He watched as she smoothed the mended fabric, then turned to the children, her smile incandescent. A smile that could thaw glaciers, coax blossoms from stone. Wade averted his gaze, a familiar unease twisting in his gut. Such warmth wasn't for him. He was a thunderhead, not a ray of sunshine. He nudged Horse onward, her image branded in his mind. Focus. Find work. Move on. The saloon beckoned, ironically dubbed the Last Chance. The saloon was dusky, air thick with stale hops and regret. A smattering of patrons dotted the room, nursing drinks, faces carved with the same exhaustion that haunted Wade. A pianist, fingers knotted and stiff, picked out a melancholy tune. Behind the scarred mahogany stood a broad-shouldered man, handlebar mustache bristling above a gaze that could sour milk. He assessed Wade's approach, eyes lingering on the well-worn leather of his sidearm. Looking for something, stranger? The barkeep grunted. Work, Wade replied, voice low and raspy. I'm handy with a gun, adept at cards, capable of settling disputes. The barkeep chuckled, a dry, mirthless rasp. This ain't Tombstone, friend. Excitement's a rare vintage around here. Everyone needs an extra hand sometime, Wade countered, gaze unwavering. Even in Willow Bend. The bartender studied him, eyes narrowed. What makes you different from the rest of the tumbleweeds that blow through? Hand out and a place to sleep? I'm not looking for charity, Wade said, his voice gaining an edge. "I'm offering a skill set. Take it or leave it." He leaned against the bar, hand instinctively brushing the worn grip of his revolver. A subtle gesture, barely perceptible, but the bartender didn't miss it. A flicker of apprehension crossed his features. All right, he conceded, raising his hands. "No need to get your dander up. I might have something." Then having trouble with uninvited guests, claim jumpers, strong-arming the local ranchers. Wade arched a brow. "Claim jumpers? Sounds like small time." "Maybe," the barkeep admitted. "But they're persistent, and they work for Silas Thorne. He's aiming to gobble up all the land in Willow Bend, and he ain't shy about using muscle." The name Silas Thorne hung heavy, a toxic miasma. Wade had heard tales of Thorne, a remorseless land baron known for crushing any resistance. He had no desire to entangle himself in a property feud, but necessity called. Horse needed rest, and he damned well needed that drink. "What's the proposition?" Wade asked, his voice flat. "Keep an eye on things," the bartender said. "Discourage Thorne's men from getting too ambitious. Remind folks they're unwanted. And compensation?" The bartender named a figure, enough to sustain Wade and horse for several weeks. "Paltry, but sufficient." "Agreed," Wade said, pushing off the bar. "I'll take it." The bartender nodded, a flicker of relief in his gaze. "Good. You can start tonight. Room's upstairs." Wade took the offered key and turned away. Passing a dusty mirror, he caught his reflection. A man with haunted depths in his eyes and a face etched by hardship. A man who had witnessed too much and felt too little. A ghost, trapped in a cycle of violence and consequence. He ascended the stairs, the aged wood complaining under his boots. The room was cramped and scantily furnished, but offered shelter. He dropped his saddlebags and sat on the edge of the bed, springs protesting. He closed his eyes, trying to quell the churning memories. The faces of the fallen, the lives marred. He was a weapon, tempered in conflict, and seemingly unable to disarm. Opening his eyes, he stared at the ceiling, thoughts spiraling. He was here, in Willow Bend, a town teetering on the precipice. And he was about to be drawn in, despite his reluctance. He envisioned the woman in the garden, her radiant smile. What did she think of men like him? Purveyors of death. Could she perceive the darkness festering beneath his hardened shell? He should leave. He should ride out of Willow Bend and sever all ties. Yet something held him captive. A glint of hope, perhaps. Or merely a morbid fascination to witness the unfolding drama. One certainty resonated. Willow Bend was on the cusp of transformation, as, perhaps, was he. Rising, he walked to the window, surveying the town below. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting long shadows across the dusty lanes. The air was still, yet Wade sensed the rising tension, the gathering storm. Trouble loomed. And he would be ready. A gunslinger, after all. It was his calling. He just underestimated what this particular calling would demand. A teacher's resolve sunlight. A golden chisel, carved through the schoolhouse window, illuminating the airborne dust motes pirouetting in its beam. Clara, her sable hair confined in a strict coil, faced her small Class A, mere 8 souls ranging in age from 6 to 12. A time-worn Aesop's Fables rested in her hands, its spine a web of cracks, its pages softened by countless recitations. Usually, her voice held a gentle music, but today it vibrated with a firm resolution. "And so, children," she began, her finger gliding beneath the words. The tortoise, though deliberate and consistent, prevails. What inherent truth does this reveal to you? A small hand shot skyward, belonging to her nephew, Thomas, a 10-year-old brimming with anticipation. It demonstrates that swiftness isn't everything, Aunt Clara. Persistence matters more. Clara's smile bloomed, chasing the fatigue etched beneath her eyes. Precisely, Thomas. Steadfastness is a virtue, a compass guiding you through life's thickets. Her gaze swept the room, connecting with each child. Whatever trials you encounter, remember the tortoise. Embrace unwavering strength, unyielding spirit. The morning unfolded, a tapestry woven with fables, sums, and sentences. Clara invested her very essence into each lesson, each gentle redirection, each spark of encouragement. She understood that for her students, this humble schoolhouse offered more than just academic instruction. It was a refuge, a haven shielding them from the harsh realities encroaching upon their fragile existence. As the last child gathered their meager belongings, their cheerful echoes fading into the afternoon's quietude, Clara slumped into her chair, a sigh escaping like a held breath. The daily exertion felt like a tangible burden, weighing heavily on her frame. She surveyed the modest room, its walls adorned only by a frayed, yellowed map of the United States. A solitary bookshelf housed their cherished texts, covers softened by eager little hands. The roof demanded repair before the next downpour, and the woodpile diminished with alarming speed. The town's stipend for the school was delayed. Again. The unspoken truth resonated. Finances were strained. Yet, she would cope. She always managed. For Thomas, for her niece, 6-year-old Lily, and for every child under her care in Willow Bend, she would discover a solution. Rising, she approached the small stove to prepare a meager supper of beans and cornbread. The distinct thud of approaching hooves shattered the stillness, sending a ripple of dread down her spine. Peering through the window, she saw 3 horsemen, their faces etched with a menacing sternness, converging on the schoolhouse. The central figure, imposing in stature, bore a cruel line to his jaw and eyes that gleamed with icy calculation. Silas Blackwood. Clara squared her shoulders, a flicker of steel in her gaze. She would not cower. Intimidation would fail. This was her sanctuary, her livelihood, her home. She would defend it with every fiber of her being. She set the pot of beans aside and strode to the door, opening it as Blackwood dismounted. His companions remained mounted, their hands hovering near their sidearms. "Afternoon, Miss Hayes," Blackwood greeted, his voice a guttural rumble, layered with veiled threat. "I trust you're enlightening the local youths?" Clara held his gaze. "That is my purpose, Mr. Blackwood." He chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Purpose. Commendable, I'm sure. Perhaps misdirected. This land, this town itself, possesses potential far beyond educating children." "Potential for what, Mr. Blackwood?" Clara countered, her voice even yet resolute. "Exploitation? Avarice? At what human cost?" Blackwood's smile dissolved, replaced by irritation. "You misunderstand, Miss Hayes. I offer opportunity, progress. Willow Bend stagnates, withers. I intend to revitalize it by displacing the families who've rooted themselves here for generations. Sentiment is a luxury I cannot afford," he stated, his eyes raking over the schoolhouse. "This establishment squanders valuable acreage. My plans for this land will benefit everyone." "Everyone enriching your coffers, you mean?" Clara retorted, her voice gaining volume. Blackwood advanced, his bulk casting a shadow over her. "Tread carefully, Miss Hayes. Disrespect yields no reward. My patience is considerable, but finite." "And what are you implying, Mr. Blackwood?" He lowered his voice to a near whisper. "I'm suggesting you and your pupils would fare better elsewhere, somewhere not impeding progress." Clara stood firm, her chin lifting in defiance. "This is our home, Mr. Blackwood. We have no intention of relinquishing it." Blackwood straightened, his eyes narrowing to slits. "You possess a stubborn spirit, Miss Hayes. I grant you that. Yet stubbornness proves perilous when obstructing progress." He touched his hat's brim. "Reflect on my words. It would be regrettable if unforeseen circumstances befell this picturesque schoolhouse." He swung back into his saddle, and with a final chilling stare, he and his men departed, leaving Clara in the doorway, her heart hammering in her chest. She closed the door, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. The confined space felt oppressive, laden with unspoken threats. Blackwood's words lingered, a dark shroud threatening to consume her and all she held precious. She moved to the window, watching their receding forms. A wave of fear washed over her, yet beneath it, a stubborn spark of defiance remained. She would not be broken. She would not be cowed. She would shield her family, her students, and her beloved home, irrespective of the sacrifice. Turning, she found Thomas and Lily huddled in the corner, their faces ashen. They had overheard everything. Kneeling, she enfolded them in a tight embrace. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "Everything will be all right. I won't allow anything to harm you, I promise." But as she gazed into their wide, frightened eyes, she realized that vows alone were insufficient. She required more than words. She needed strength, fortitude, and a considerable stroke of luck. And perhaps, just perhaps, assistance from a weary gunslinger who appeared to be searching for a reason to linger. Clasping her niece and nephew tighter, she steeled her resolve. She was a teacher, a guardian, a protector, and she would wage war for her kin and her community with every fiber of her being. Blackwood had declared his intentions, and now so would she. The battle for Willow Bend had been engaged, and Clara Hayes stood ready. Sparks of defiance dust, tasting of stale iron and bitter choices, swirled around Wade as he slouched against the general store's sagging porch, a silent audience to Silas Blackwood's calculated theater. Blackwood, whose smile was a mere grimace on his face, addressed Clara, his voice a velvet rasp that carried across the hard-packed earth of the street. Flanking him, his goons stood like granite statues, wordlessly amplifying the menace. Clara, though slight, possessed a spine of tempered steel, radiating unexpected resolve. Wade, watching, felt a nascent emotion stir, something more profound than mere disapproval of injustice. It was the lift of her chin, the unwavering gaze in the face of overwhelming odds, that awakened a dormant part of himself. Blackwood swept a hand toward the schoolhouse, his tone oozing counterfeit solicitude. "Miss Hayes, surely you grasp that progress demands shifts. This parcel it squandered on childhood fantasies. My offer is generous, equitable. Imagine the possibilities it unlocks for Willow Bend." Clara's reply, though soft, pierced Blackwood's artificial charm like an ice-pick. "Possibilities for whom, Mr. Blackwood? For your pockets? This schoolhouse transcends mere brick and mortar. It's a haven, a promise for the youngsters here. It is not negotiable." Blackwood's smile tightened into a brittle line. "Sentimentality is a luxury this dying town can ill afford, Miss Hayes. I extend a chance for rebirth. He paused, letting the unspoken weight of his meaning sink in. Refusal carries consequences, of course. One would hate for anything untoward to befall this his sanctuary. The threat hung in the air, a palpable miasma. A familiar heat began to bloom in Wade's chest. A banked fire he usually kept smothered. He recognized Blackwood's ilk, men who profited from weakness, who weaponized advancement. He'd cultivated detachment, preferring to exist as a phantom. Yet, something in Blackwood's predatory gaze upon Clara ignited a primal urge, his fingers itching towards the Colt at his side. As Blackwood and his crew prepared to depart, old Thomas, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, and his son Jebediah barred their way. Thomas, his stance unwavering despite his age, declared, "You ain't wanted here, Blackwood. Take your avarice and leave." A silent exchange passed between Blackwood's enforcers. One, a scarred behemoth, shoved Thomas aside with unnecessary force. The old man stumbled, nearly losing his balance. Jebediah lunged forward, fists bunched, only to be seized by the other thug, who slammed him against the general store's clapboard wall. Wade peeled himself from the porch rail. The atmosphere crackled with impending violence. He'd sworn off involvement, but the sight of the youth pinned and helpless, mirroring his own failures to protect the vulnerable, served as a potent catalyst. His boots crunched on the parched earth, drawing attention like a struck match in a dark room. Blackwood turned, his expression a mask of mingled annoyance and amusement. "And who might you be, sir? Merely a transient, I gather?" Wade halted a few feet distant, his focus laser-locked on the man holding Jebediah. "Just passing through," he echoed, his tone level. "But I hold little affection for bullies." The man's lip curled. "Butt out, Drifter. This ain't your concern." Wade's eyes narrowed into slits. "It is now." He moved with surprising swiftness, his hand a blur as the Colt appeared. The man gripping Jebediah barely registered the movement before cold steel pressed against his temple. "Release him," Wade commanded, his voice a silken threat. Terror bloomed in the man's eyes. He released Jebediah, who staggered back, gasping for air. Wade kept the pistol trained on the enforcer as he retreated, rejoining his companion. Blackwood observed the tableau with a cool, considering gaze. Unsurprised, merely calculating. "A tad impetuous, wouldn't you concur?" he commented, his voice remaining smooth. "Violence rarely offers lasting solutions." Wade reholstered his pistol, his gaze unwavering. "Sometimes," he stated, "it's the sole language some understand." Blackwood emitted a dry chuckle, devoid of mirth. "Indeed. Well, I perceive my welcome has expired. We shall take our leave. But rest assured, Miss Hayes, this is far from concluded. Our paths will cross again." He offered a mocking doff of his hat to Clara, before turning and striding towards his awaiting horses, his henchmen scrambling to keep pace. The townsfolk watched their departure, their faces etched with mingled relief and unease. Jebediah approached Wade, his face still crimson. "Thank you, mister. I don't know what would have transpired if you hadn't." Wade silenced him with a wave. "Just steer clear of trouble." He pivoted and walked toward the schoolhouse, compelled by an unseen force. He discovered Clara on the porch, her eyes fixed on Blackwood's retreating back. "Thank you," she said softly, turning to face him. "For your intervention." Wade shrugged. "They overstepped." He leaned against a porch post, studying her. He observed a worry shadowing her features, the fear she valiantly tried to suppress. He noted the strength, too, the unyielding resolve shining in her irises. "He won't relent," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He covets this land, and will employ any means to obtain it." Then readiness for conflict is paramount, Wade said, his voice devoid of emotion. Clara gazed at him, her expression a blend of sorrow and defiance. I desire no conflict. I simply wish to educate these children, to offer them a prospect for a brighter future. Wade scoffed, a harsh sound that shattered the stillness of the twilight air. A naive aspiration, Miss Hayes. This world is indifferent to dreams. It only responds to power. And Blackwood commands a great deal of it. And what are your concerns, Mr. Colton? Clara inquired, her eyes probing. Besides avoiding entanglement, that is. Wade visibly recoiled, as if struck. He averted his gaze, fixating on the distant horizon. Nothing, he uttered, his voice barely a breath. I harbor no concerns. Clara closed the distance between them, her presence an unexpected warmth. I disbelieve that, she said gently. Everyone possesses something they value. Even you. Wade remained mute, his face a blank canvas. He resisted the urge to care. Caring represented weakness, a vulnerability he could not afford, a lesson etched in loss. He was a specter, a phantom, a man unburdened by ties. And he intended to maintain that state. Yet, as he looked at Clara, at the unwavering faith mirrored in her gaze, he felt a flicker of something alien and perilous, a spark of rebellion perhaps, or, conceivably, a reason to linger. Hammer and hope dust devils danced around Wade's scuffed boots, a visual echo of the unease churning within him. He hadn't intended to volunteer. It was the raw fortitude warring with vulnerability in her gaze that disarmed him. That look stirred echoes of buried memories, best left undisturbed. All right, Miss Hayes, he conceded, the words gravelly in his throat. I'll lend a hand with your schoolhouse. Clara's shoulders eased, a subtle shift he didn't miss. Thank you, Mr. Colton. Your help means more than I can express. The schoolhouse's condition was far worse than a casual glance suggested. The roof slumped with weary resignation. Shattered panes punctuated the windows, and the clapboard was consumed by wood rot. It reeked of dank earth and abandonment, a sharp contrast to the tidy interior he'd observed. Wade's calloused fingers traced a fractured window frame, the wood yielding with brittle protest. This is quite a task. Clara sighed, tucking a stray wisp of hair behind her ear. I know. Thomas, my brother, used to care for it. But, since his passing, her voice dwindled, the weight of unspoken grief palpable. Wade grunted, averting his eyes. Grief wasn't his forte. Neither was shared sorrow. Such things unlocked chambers he kept firmly locked. Where are the tools kept? She guided him to a lianta behind the schoolhouse, its door groaning open like a lament. Inside, saws, hammers, and axes were strewn among stacks of lumber and rusted nails. Wade hefted a hammer, testing its balance. It felt alien, unfamiliar. His constructions had been reduced to rubble for years. Thomas was meticulous, Clara offered, a note of yearning in her tone. He possessed a knack for craftsmanship. He built this schoolhouse himself, you know. Wade glanced at her, a flicker of something close to respect etching his features. He did a solid job. They labored in silence, the air punctuated only by the rhythmic thud of hammer on nail and the coarse song of the saw biting into wood. Wade found himself strangely absorbed in the work, the exertion a welcome reprieve from the phantoms that usually dogged his steps. He focused on the wood's texture, the hammer's angle, the gratifying fit of new planks. Clara, too, worked tirelessly, patching wall breaches and clearing debris. Her hands, weathered and strong, moved with practiced efficiency. He watched her the way she worried her lip in concentration. The determined set of her chin. She possessed a tensile strength that belied her frame, a resilience he hadn't initially recognized. "You know," she remarked, interrupting the quiet, "you don't strike me as a carpenter, Mr. Colton." Wade paused, wiping perspiration from his forehead with the back of his hand. "I'm not." "Then what are you?" she probed, her eyes holding his. He hesitated, the truth leaving a bitter residue. "A drifter. I follow the whims of the wind." "And where has the wind carried you, Mr. Colton?" He looked away, towards the boundless prairie. "To places I'd prefer to erase." Clara didn't press. She sensed the invisible barrier he'd raised. Instead, she shifted the focus. "My brother." He envisioned Willow Bend flourishing. A place where families could take root. "Dreams often remain just that," Wade stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "Indeed," she concurred, a subtle sorrow coloring her expression. "But that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to realize them." He studied her, the unyielding optimism in her eyes a stark contrast to his jaded worldview. He almost cautioned her against such idealism. But something restrained him. Her tenacious spirit resonated with a dormant part of himself. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the prairie in long shadows, they paused for a rest. Clara produced a flask of water and 2 tin cups, handing one to Wade, her fingertips grazing his. A surprising jolt surged through him. "Thanks," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. They sat in contemplative silence, savoring the water as the sky transitioned from azure to fiery orange and deep violet. The air was cool and sharp, infused with the mingled scents of pine and moist earth. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Wade experienced a modicum of peace, a quietude that settled over his troubled soul. "My given name is Wade," he volunteered, the words almost involuntary. Clara smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression that illuminated her face. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Wade." "And yours is genuinely Clara?" he inquired, feeling a nascent smile tug at his lips. "It is," she confirmed, "though some around here refer to me as the schoolmarm. Typically, Blackwood's cronies." He chuckled, the sound rusty and unfamiliar. "I can imagine." She laughed, a bright, melodious sound that banished the silence. It was a pure, untainted sound, absent of the worry and sadness he'd witnessed previously. He found himself mirroring her smile, a warmth spreading through him. "You know," Clara said, her eyes dancing with amusement, "you're not quite as awful as I initially presumed, Wade Colton." "And you're not as resolute as I anticipated, Clara Hayes." They lapsed into silence, an unspoken connection forming between them. It was a tentative bond, forged through shared effort and nascent respect. Yet it was there, a faint spark of hope in the gathering gloom. As the last vestiges of sunlight faded, Wade stood, stretching his aching muscles. "I should head back." "Will you return tomorrow?" Clara asked, her voice tinged with hesitancy. He paused, wrestling with his impulse to flee and the burgeoning sense of responsibility. I expect so, unless you've reconsidered my involvement." Clara shook her head, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "No, my mind remains unchanged. Thank you, Wade." He nodded, turning to leave. As he walked away, he glanced back at the schoolhouse, a stark silhouette against the twilight. It remained damaged, undeniably requiring repair. Yet it stood as an emblem of hope, a testament to the unwavering dedication of the woman who cherished it. And for the first time in years, Wade felt a sense of purpose stirring within him. He trudged back to his sparse lodging, the memory of Clara's smile imprinted on his thoughts. He understood he was treading a perilous path, involving himself in her struggle. It would be far simpler, safer to simply mount his horse and vanish into the anonymity of the open range. Yet something deep within him resisted. Something about Clara, about her steadfast optimism and unyielding strength, had resonated with him in a way he couldn't fully articulate. He spent the night sleepless, staring at the ceiling, the specters of his past swirling around him like a malevolent wind. He recalled his father, a kind soul betrayed by those he trusted most. He envisioned his brother, who had perished protecting him, and he grieved for the woman he had loved, snatched away too soon. He had devoted years to evading his past, desperately trying to outrun the torment and culpability. But he knew, intrinsically, that such evasion was unsustainable. Eventually, he would have to confront his demons. And perhaps, just perhaps, assisting Clara provided a means to do so. Perhaps, by championing her cause, he could finally discover a path to self-forgiveness. As the initial rays of dawn filtered through the window, Wade arose from his bed, his heart a blend of trepidation and resolve. He knew the road ahead would be arduous and fraught with challenges. But he also knew he wasn't alone in the fight. He had Clara, and maybe, just maybe, that would prove sufficient. Shadows of the past, the first omen arrived subtly, easily brushed aside. A shattered pane at the schoolhouse, its fragments sparkling like wicked jewels scattered across the dirt floor. Clara's gasp alerted Wade. He was instantly at her side, his gaze hardening as he assessed the damage. No explanation was needed. The intent resonated clearly. "Blackwood," she breathed, a tremor in her voice, though defiance blazed in her gaze. A familiar chill settled over Wade, the protective instinct, sharpened by years of strife, surging within him. "He aims to drive us out. He'll need more than that," Wade countered, his tone a low growl. He set about boarding the window, the steady thud of hammer against wood a percussive response to the anger simmering within. He was weary of flight, of seeing the innocent suffer. Something had stirred in him since reaching Willow Bend, a faint ember of purpose, dormant for too long. The next act of intimidation was far less veiled. A band of Blackwood's thugs, faces masked by bandanas, swaggered into town midday, their mounts churning dust and sowing apprehension. Arrogance rode with them, their eyes raking the townsfolk with unveiled scorn. Halting before the schoolhouse, their leader dismounted with a sneer. "Tell the schoolmarm we're just offerin' greetings," he drawled, menace lacing his words like poison. He spat, the sound amplified by the palpable tension. "Blackwood wants her to know he ain't foolin' around." Wade emerged from the building, his hand edging towards the pistol at his waist. Clara's hand, surprisingly firm, landed on his arm. "Don't," she urged, her eyes reflecting her apprehension. "Don't give him the excuse he craves." Wade paused, his stare locked on the ringleader. He perceived the feral glint in their eyes, the craving for a fight, the anticipation of bloodshed. Any confrontation, he knew, would only escalate the danger, placing Clara and the entire community at greater risk. With visible restraint, he relinquished his grip. "Get off this land," he stated, his voice even but resolute. "And inform Blackwood he's wasting his breath." The man's laugh was harsh, grating. "You and whose army, old-timer?" Before Wade could answer, a stone hurtled through the air, connecting squarely with the leader's face. He stumbled, clutching at his nose, crimson staining his fingers. The rest of the men spun around, hands flying to their weapons. Behind them, young Billy, Clara's nephew, stood firm, his eyes blazing. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Leave my aunt in peace." The situation hung precariously. Wade understood that one wrong move would ignite a conflagration. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Billy and the gang. "He's just a boy," he said, his voice slicing through the thick tension. "Let it go." The leader glared, his features twisted with fury. Yet something in Wade's gaze, something icily unwavering, gave him pause. With a curse, he spat again and swung back onto his horse. "This isn't finished," he threatened. "We'll return." They thundered off in a swirling haze, leaving behind a town fractured by fear. Clara swept Billy into a tight embrace. "You shouldn't have done that," she reproached gently, her voice shaky. "I couldn't just stand there," he mumbled against her shoulder. Wade watched them, a knot of unease tightening in his chest. Blackwood wouldn't relent. He'd continue to turn the screws until he got what he desired. And he couldn't simply observe it all unfold. He needed to act. But how? As dusk painted long shadows across the landscape, a solitary rider materialized on the horizon. Lean and imposing, with a weathered countenance and eyes that seemed to bore through the gloom. He rode a black stallion, its hooves drumming a rhythmic beat on the parched earth. As he neared, a shiver snaked down Wade's spine. He recognized that visage, those eyes. They belonged to a specter from his former life, a bleak reminder he had desperately tried to bury. The rider reined in before the saloon, dismounted, and secured his horse to the rail. He proceeded towards the entrance, his spurs chiming with each stride. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the town with predatory intensity. Then, pushing open the doors, he entered. Wade sat at a table in the rear, nursing whiskey. He saw the rider's entrance, the methodical way his eyes scanned the room, searching. Inevitably, their gazes would meet. He inhaled deeply, bracing himself for the inescapable confrontation. The rider's eyes found their mark. A slow smile stretched across his face, a mirthless, calculating expression. "Well, well," he purred, his voice as smooth as oil. "Wade Colton, it's been a long road." Wade remained silent, his eyes fixed on the rider, his hand near his pistol. "I've been hunting you a good while, Wade," the rider continued, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "Seems you've gotten yourself mired in some trouble. Blackwood's put a steep price on your head." Clara, who had been standing near Wade, gasped softly. She looked at him, her eyes mirroring confusion and disbelief. "You're a wanted man?" she whispered. Wade offered no reply. His eyes remained locked on the rider, his thoughts racing. This was the reckoning, his past catching up. A choice loomed. Flee, abandoning Clara and the town to Blackwood's ruthlessness, or stand and fight, risking everything. "I'm not going anywhere," Wade stated, his voice a low growl. "Tell Blackwood to come get me himself." The rider chuckled darkly. "Don't mind if I do." His hand moved with blinding speed towards his gun. Wade reacted instantly, drawing and firing in one seamless motion. The bullet slammed into the rider's chest, sending him reeling backward. He crashed to the floor, shock widening his eyes. Pandemonium erupted within the saloon. Screams filled the air as patrons scrambled for cover. Wade stood over the fallen man, his gun still smoking. He looked at Clara, her face drained of color. "I didn't want this," he said, regret coloring his voice. "But," But he left me no choice. Clara gazed at him, her eyes a complex blend of fear and understanding. She knew Wade possessed a dangerous edge, a shadowed history, but she also sensed a core of decency, a heart slowly beginning to mend. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Wade met her gaze, his eyes hardening with resolve. "We fight," he declared. "We fight for this town, for your brother's memory, and for a chance to build a life free from the past." The Rubicon had been crossed. The specters of his old life had returned, threatening to overwhelm them. But in the face of imminent peril, Wade had discovered a reason to stay and confront the darkness, a reason to hope for a new dawn. The fragile promise of Willow Bend was about to be forged in fire. Confessions in the rain. The rain began tentatively, a soft patter against the parched earth, before swelling into a tempest. From the saloon's porch, Wade observed the deluge distorting Willow Bend into a blurry tableau of muted browns and somber grays. His instinct was to move on, to keep running as he always had. Yet, Clara Hayes's visage, lined with anxieties that mirrored his own, held him captive. Earlier he'd seen her battling the wind towards the schoolhouse, her resolve a beacon that both fascinated and troubled him. Almost despite himself, he found his boots carrying him toward the schoolhouse. Rain slicked his hair to his scalp, saturated his threadbare coat. Inside, lamplight painted the hung desks in a golden glow. Clara was hunched over papers, her brow creased in concentration. He paused at the threshold, the storm's clamor a convenient excuse for retreat. But then her gaze lifted, met his, and a tentative smile graced her lips. "Wade," she greeted, her voice a gentle chime against the storm's fury. "Come in. You'll catch your death out there." He entered, shaking water like a drenched mutt. The small schoolhouse radiated a sense of sanctuary, a haven far removed from his usual existence. The air hummed with the comforting scent of paper and ink, an aroma of simple innocence. I wanted to see if you were all right," he stammered, feeling awkward, like an intruder. Clara scrutinized him, her eyes unwavering. "After the bounty hunter, I'd understand if you reconsidered." He met her stare, the weight of his past a tangible burden. "I gave my word." "A promise you didn't need to make," she countered softly. "I saw the man you killed, Wade. He knew you. There's a history there, isn't there?" He averted his gaze, his jaw tightening. The rain lashed the roof, a relentless echo of the turmoil within. "Everyone carries a past, Clara." "Some are heavier burdens," she responded quietly. "Yours feels weighty." He drifted to the window, peering into the rain-streaked street. He knew he couldn't conceal it forever, not from her, not if he planned to stay. "It began long ago," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "I was different then, naive, more foolish." He recounted his descent into the allure of a gang, seduced by the empty promise of easy wealth and a belonging he craved. He spoke of the robberies, the brutality, the acts that now haunted his waking moments. He told her of Sarah, a girl with eyes the color of a summer sky, who had glimpsed a flicker of goodness in him, a light he believed extinguished. His voice faltered as he described the day they targeted the wrong bank, the day the Pinkertons descended, the day Sarah was caught in the crossfire. The memory played vividly, a cruel spectacle, her blue eyes widening as the fatal bullet struck, her lifeblood blooming across her pristine white dress. "They held me accountable," he rasped, his voice thick with anguish. "Said I led them there. Maybe I did. blinded by greed to the monster we were becoming. He confessed to turning on his comrades, aiding the law in their capture. He recounted his testimony, the implicit death sentence he signed. He fled, reinvented himself, attempted to bury the ghosts. "I thought I could escape it," he confessed, turning back to face her. "But it clings to me, Clara, like a damned shadow." Clara stood motionless, her eyes brimming with tears. Instead of words, she approached and gently clasped his hand. Her touch radiated warmth, solace, a striking contrast to the iciness that had enveloped his soul for Kav. "So long. I understand," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I understand what it's like to lose someone precious, to carry the weight of responsibility." He looked at her, surprised. He knew of her brother, the tragedy in the mine. But he hadn't grasped. "You blame yourself, don't you?" he asked softly. She nodded, tears coursing down her cheeks. He was trying to earn enough to repair the schoolhouse roof. I implored him. I needed him to. Now he's gone, and the roof still leaks. They stood in shared silence, broken only by the relentless rhythm of the rain. Two fractured spirits, seeking comfort in the other's ache. "It wasn't your doing, Clara," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Just as Sarah's fate wasn't my intention." "But you feel the weight of it," she countered, looking up at him, her eyes mirroring a pain he knew intimately. "Yes," he conceded, "but feeling responsible doesn't make it reality. It doesn't define who we are." He tightened his grip on her hand, experiencing a connection that had been dormant for years, a connection that both terrified and invigorated him. "We can't rewrite the past, Clara," he said, "but we can dictate the future." He surveyed the schoolhouse, the well-worn desks, the faded maps adorning the walls, then turned to Clara, her face illuminated by the lantern's glow, her eyes radiating an inspiring resolve. "Perhaps," he ventured, a faint smile playing on his lips, "perhaps we can forge something new, together." Clara returned the smile, a genuine expression that lit up her face. "Perhaps we can," she affirmed. The rain persevered, washing away the accumulated dust and grime, purifying the world. And within the humble schoolhouse, two damaged hearts began their slow mend. A fragile yet resilient bond was forming, wrought from shared grief and a nascent spark of hope. Wade knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, that Blackwood wouldn't concede easily. But for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. He possessed a purpose to remain, a reason to contend, a reason to have faith, and that, he understood, was worth more than anything he had ever relinquished. A choice of futures dawn bled across the horizon, transforming the inky blackness into a canvas of coral and gold, a vivid counterpoint to the shadowy depths still clinging to the valley floor. Wade, perched on the porch of the modest dwelling, felt the rough texture of the wood coat beneath his hands, hardened by years of labor and violence. Clara's potent coffee, a brew that could kickstart a dead man, sat untouched beside him. The previous night's tempest had mirrored the storm raging within his soul. A deceptive stillness now reigned, yet the questions that haunted him remained, each a jagged edge threatening to tear him apart. He'd confessed everything to Clara, Sarah, the gang, the life he'd desperately tried to bury. In return, she had unveiled her own sorrows, her own weighty burdens. Expecting censure, perhaps even disgust, he encountered only understanding, a gentle empathy that disarmed him more effectively than any weapon. The morning air, sharp and invigorating, carried the mingled fragrances of pine and wet earth. Soon the children spilled out of the house, faces gleaming with cleanliness, garments mended with care. Their joyous cries, as they raced towards the barn, resonated in the crystalline air, stirring something dormant within him, a part he thought had withered and died long ago. He watched them, these innocents under Clara's fierce protection, and wrestled with the question of whether a man stained by violence and regret could ever truly find a place in this sanctuary, Willow Bend, a haven where hope stubbornly refused to be extinguished. The impulse to flee tugged at him. Mounting his horse and vanishing with the sunrise would be effortless. A return to his old ways. A clean slate, a new horizon. Yet, this time, the idea felt different. Tainted. Freedom wasn't the siren's call. It was something else, an emotion he couldn't quite define. A nascent sense of obligation. Clara emerged, her hair gathered in a simple plait, her gaze still marked by the lingering shadows of grief, yet radiating a quiet fortitude. Her approach was steady, unwavering. And his heart, a thing accustomed to scars and calluses, stumbled in its rhythm. "Morning, May," she greeted him, her voice like the soft chime of a bell. "Morning," he rasped, his own voice a low rumble. She settled beside him on the porch, a comfortable quiet weaving between them. He avoided her gaze, afraid of what she might glimpse within his depths. He considered himself unworthy of her kindness, undeserving of her trust. He was a fractured man, a danger to all who dared to venture too close. "The children are anxious to resume their lessons," she broke the silence. "They have missed their routines." He nodded, his attention drawn to the far-off hills. "They're fortunate to have you." A wistful smile touched her lips. "Fleeting as a hummingbird's wing, I do what I can." He turned, searching her eyes. "You're more than enough, Clara." A delicate blush rose on her cheeks, and she averted her gaze. The silence returned, now thick with unspoken emotions, heavy with the weight of possibilities. He realized he couldn't remain in this uncertain space, trapped between a past he couldn't escape and a future he questioned whether he deserved. Later, Wade encountered Eli tending his humble garden. His brow creased in concentration as he inspected a drooping tomato plant. With his calm demeanor and steadfast faith, Eli offered a much-needed sense of balance to Willow Bend, a man who had weathered his share of storms without losing his faith in the inherent goodness of humanity. "Morning, Wade," Eli greeted, standing tall and wiping his brow with a weathered hand. "A good day to be working with the earth." "Morning, morning, Eli," Wade replied, leaning against the fence. "Seems like you have some challenges here." Eli sighed deeply. "These tomatoes are stubborn things, just like some folks I know, and I won't name names." He offered Wade a meaningful look. Wade shifted uncomfortably. "I need some advice, Eli." Eli chuckled softly. "Advice is a tricky thing, Wade. A lot of times it's best to work things out on your own." "I know," Wade confessed, "but I'm adrift." Eli gave a slow nod. "Lost is a place we all wind up in, one time or another. Finding your way back is what really counts." "I don't know if I can," Wade admitted, his voice barely audible. "I've done things, Eli. Things that can't be undone." Eli rested a firm hand on Wade's shoulder. "We all bear a load, Wade. Some weigh more than others. But a load doesn't define us. It's what we choose to do with it. Do we crumble beneath it, or use the weight to build something stronger?" Wade met Eli's gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and uncertainty. "I don't know how to build, Eli. I only know how to break." "That's not true," Eli countered firmly. "There's good in you, Wade. I can see it. You're just too afraid to let it surface." Wade scoffed dismissively. "Afraid would be a gross understatement. A fear's a powerful force," Eli conceded. "It can freeze us, keep us from reaching our potential. But it can also drive us to protect the things that matter most." Wade thought of Clara, the children, the fragile thread of hope that had begun to weave itself around Willow Bend. He thought of Harper, the ruthless land baron, his insatiable greed. He thought of those already hurt, families dispossessed, lives shattered. "What do you think I should do, Eli?" Wade asked, desperation lacing his tone. Eli's smile was gentle. "That's something you must answer for yourself, Wade. But I'll tell you this. The hardest path is often the righteous one, and the biggest rewards come from facing those fears and fighting for what you believe in." Standing in the middle of the dusty street, bathed in the long shadows cast by the setting sun, Wade gazed toward the schoolhouse. Its unassuming structure symbolized everything he had always avoided: community, purpose, the possibility of redemption. He pictured Clara, her unwavering strength, her boundless compassion. He imagined the children, their innocent faces, their eyes filled with hope. Eli's quiet wisdom, his unwavering faith, also came to mind. And then he knew what he had to do. He headed towards the saloon, the swinging doors groaning open as he entered. The familiar stale atmosphere of beer and tobacco served as a stark reminder of the life he was striving to cast off. Harper was seated at a table, surrounded by his cronies, a sneer twisting his features. Wade approached him, his steps measured and resolute. Harper looked up, his eyes hardening. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," he drawled, his voice laced with mockery. "The gunslinger. Thought you'd have skipped town by now." I changed my mind," Wade said, his voice steady and unwavering. Harper erupted in laughter. "And what prompted that change of heart? Did the schoolmarm finally get under your skin, persuade you to stay on and play the hero?" "She didn't have to," Wade countered. "I made the decision for myself." "And what would that decision be?" Harper asked, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I'm staying," Wade declared. "I'm staying to defend Willow Bend." Harper's laughter abruptly ceased, turning into a low growl. "You're making a mistake, Colton," he warned, his tone menacing. "You don't want to get tangled up in this. I already am," Wade responded. "And I'm not backing down now." He turned and strode out of the saloon, the burning stares of Harper and his men fixed upon his back. He knew he had just acquired a formidable adversary, but it mattered little. He had made his choice. He had chosen a future worth defending. He walked back towards the schoolhouse, the sunset painting the heavens in a blaze of fiery oranges and reds. He spotted Clara standing on the porch, observing him, her eyes reflecting a mix of hope and trepidation. He moved towards her, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. "I'm staying, Clara," he declared, his voice resonating with newfound conviction. "I'm staying to help you protect Willow Bend." Clara's eyes widened slightly, and a slow, radiant smile illuminated her face. "Thank you, Wade," she whispered. He reached out, his weathered hand gently enveloping hers, his calloused fingers interlacing with her own. Gazing into her eyes, he saw a reflection of himself, a reflection of hope, a reflection of a future he had never dared to envision. He knew the path ahead would be arduous, yet he was no longer alone. He had discovered a reason to stay, a reason to fight, a reason to believe in something beyond mere survival. He had found a place to call home. Under siege, heat devils spiraled across the baked earth, mirroring the roiling anxiety in Wade's stomach. He leaned against the porch post of the Willow Bend schoolhouse, ostensibly carving a piece of cottonwood, but his gaze swept the horizon, following the shimmering mirage where grassland kissed sky. A premonitory tingle ran down his spine, a sense of encroaching darkness. He knew Harper wouldn't suffer his defiance in silence. Inside, the rhythmic drone of young voices reciting lessons was a delicate shield against the mounting dread. Clara's voice, clear and calming, drifted through the open window, a hopeful refrain in a desolate landscape. He found himself listening for its reassurance, needing it more than pride would allow. The first indication was a distant ripple of motion horsemen, a tight cluster, slicing across the open country with ill intent. Too many for chance travelers, their pace too driven. Wade tossed aside the half-carved wood, the sliver landing soundlessly on the dusty ground. "Clara," he said, his voice a hushed warning as he stepped inside. The pupils looked up, jolted from their studies. Clara turned from the blackboard, concern creasing her brow. "Riders inbound. Likely Harper's crew. Get the children down." Panic flickered in Clara's expression, but her tone remained composed. "Everyone, quickly, under your desks. Stay quiet." She moved with practiced grace, guiding the littlest ones, her touch a calming presence on their small backs. Wade positioned himself by the window, his hand instinctively gravitating to the Colt peacemaker at his waist. The riders drew nearer, their features hardening, their purpose etched on their grim faces. Silas Blackwood led the pack, a cruel smirk twisting his mouth. "Wade, what can we do?" Clara's question was a mere breath, fear wrestling with raw courage. "I'm going to keep them from hurting you and the kids," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection, a vow etched in granite. The riders hauled their mounts to a stop just outside the schoolhouse, raising a swirling cloud of dust. Blackwood dismounted, his boots grinding on the parched earth as he swaggered toward the entrance. "Colton!" he roared, his voice dripping with malice. "Come out here and face your reckoning." Wade remained motionless, observing Blackwood through the glass, his gaze unwavering. "I have no interest in facing you, Blackwood. You and your thugs can ride on." Blackwood cackled, a dry, rasping sound that sent chills down Clara's spine. "You truly think you can stop us? You're a single man." "One man is all it often requires," Wade countered, his voice frigid. Blackwood's smirk evaporated, replaced by a venomous scowl. "Have it your way. Colton." He motioned to his men. "Torch it." A fusillade of shots erupted, shattering panes, sending shards of glass raining down. The children shrieked, burrowing under their desks, faces hidden. Clara flattened, herself against the wall, sheltering a small girl clinging to her leg. Wade moved with an agility that belied his weariness. He kicked out the remaining glass, creating makeshift gun slits. He drew his Colt, the familiar weight a source of grim solace. He squeezed the trigger, the gunshot reverberating in the enclosed space. A rider howled, clutching his shoulder, and toppled from his saddle. The air thickened with the sharp tang of gunpowder and the terrified cries of youngsters. Clara, her face smudged with grime and streaked with tears, crawled to Wade's side, handing him a rifle. "I can use it," she said, her voice trembling, yet resolute. Wade nodded, accepting the weapon. He fired, felling another attacker. Blackwood's men returned fire, bullets ripping through the schoolhouse's aged timbers. Clara reloaded the rifle, her movements surprisingly steady. She watched Wade, his expression grim, his focus absolute, his actions precise and lethal. She saw him transformed, fighting for more than just survival. A protector, a guardian, a man worthy of her trust, and the lives of the children. The skirmish intensified. The small schoolhouse, a solitary beacon of resistance against insurmountable odds. Wade and Clara fought as one, their resolve strengthened by a shared purpose: to shield the innocent lives huddled within. Then, a crude bomb detonated against the structure, the glass exploding, the volatile fluid spreading across the dry wood. Flames surged upwards, consuming the boards with frightening speed. "We have to get out," Clara screamed, her voice raspy with smoke. Wade understood. Confinement meant certain death. He unleashed a series of shots, providing cover as Clara herded the children toward the rear exit. He cast one final, agonizing glance at the schoolhouse, his heart aching at the inferno devouring Clara's sanctuary, now a pyre of lost hope. He followed Clara and the children outside, emerging into a small clearing behind the structure. Blackwood's men lay in wait, weapons aimed at the fleeing figures. Wade raised his Colt, prepared for his final stand. But then a shout pierced the air from the wood's edge. "Hold fast, Blackwood!" It was Willow Bend's citizenry, armed with rifles and shotguns, their faces etched with steely determination. They'd heard the assault and rallied to defend their home. Blackwood's cohort faltered, their advantage eroded. A brutal exchange of gunfire erupted, the air filling with a cacophony of shots and the wounded's cries. Sensing the shift in power, Wade realized they possessed an advantage. He grasped Clara's hand. "Get the children safe," he commanded. "I'll buy you time." Clara nodded, gratitude shining in her eyes. She guided the children away, toward the refuge of the town. Wade remained, a lonely warrior against a tide of malice. He fought with a desperate savagery, his bullets finding their marks with deadly accuracy. Blackwood, witnessing his men fall, understood he was losing. With a furious roar, he wheeled his horse and fled, his remaining henchmen scrambling after him. The townsfolk erupted in cheers, their voices filled with relief and triumph. Wade stood panting, his muscles screaming, his clothes shredded and bloodied. His gaze scanned toward town, searching for Clara. He found her caring for the children, her countenance etched with fatigue, yet her eyes gleamed with indomitable spirit. He walked toward her, his heart swelling with an unfamiliar warmth. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Clara met his gaze, her eyes locking with his. "We're alive, Wade. That's sufficient." He saw the truth in her expression, the unwavering belief that pulsed within her. He knew then he could not abandon Willow Bend. He could not leave Clara. He had discovered something worthy of defending, worthy of living for. The schoolhouse was gone, reduced to smoldering wreckage. But the soul of Willow Bend endured, unyielding, unbroken. And Wade Colton, the drifter with nothing to lose, had finally found a reason to stay. He understood the fight was not concluded. Blackwood would inevitably return, but he also knew he would not confront it alone. He would stand beside Clara, with the children, with the community of Willow Bend, and he would safeguard them with every last breath. He had discovered his home, his purpose, his redemption, in the heart of a humble town, and reflected in the eyes of a woman who had enlightened him to the meaning of faith. Whispers of the heart, the air tasted of imminent rain and carried the tang of burning wood. Wade, perched on the schoolhouse porch, honed the edge of his blade. The rasp of steel against stone punctuated the unease churning in his stomach, a feeling foreign after years of hard-won calm. Inside, Clara, bathed in the soft glow leaking from the doorway, was absorbed in her student's papers. He should vanish, disappear into the gathering gloom before Harper's thugs returned, before his presence brought further grief. Yet, abandoning her, leaving Willow Bend to face its fate, felt like self-amputation. He squinted at the horizon, bruised with approaching darkness. "Weather's turning," he rumbled, the words barely audible. Clara materialized in the doorway, framed by the golden light. "Indeed," she murmured, her voice laced with something deeper than meteorology. "The air's been thick with it for days." The sheathing of his knife was a sharp, decisive sound in the stillness. "Harper won't forget this slight, Clara. They'll be back to collect." "I expect them," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "And we'll be ready for them." She descended the steps, the whisper of her skirt against his boot a startling sensation. A current sparked between them, a forbidden warmth he'd long suppressed. "You shouldn't have to be," he growled, his voice rough-edged. "Your place is in the classroom shaping young minds, not defending them from killers." "And what of you, Wade?" She parried, her eyes searching his soul. "Condemned to an endless ride into the sunset? Haunted by what you've left behind?" He averted his gaze, stung by the accuracy of her words. "It's what I do best," he admitted, the confession bitter. "Running is my talent. Or is it merely a habit, a well-worn rut?" she questioned gently. He met her gaze again, seeing not accusation, but a steadfast belief in a potential he himself doubted existed. It was terrifying. "I don't want you caught in the crossfire," he confessed, the words ragged. "I'm not worth risking yourself for." Clara closed the distance, her hand reaching for his forearm. Her touch, tentative yet firm, sent a tremor through him. "Don't presume to dictate my feelings, Wade," she said, her voice barely a breath. "I am not some passing fancy. I see you, Wade Colton, the man beneath the armor of regret, the good man you're determined to bury." He recoiled as if struck, the fortress around his heart threatening to crumble. "There's no goodness left," he insisted, his voice strained and raw. "Only the residue of violence." "Everyone carries shadows, Wade," she countered, her voice unwavering. "It's how we wield them that defines us. You channeled yours to shield those children yesterday. You chose to stand with us. A killer wouldn't have done that." He stared at his hands, gnarled and etched with scars, emblems of a life steeped in brutality. "These are instruments of death, Clara," he rasped, his voice laced with disgust. "And also of creation, of protection, of healing," she insisted, her grip tightening slightly. "Don't let the past be your jailer, Wade. You have the power to forge a different destiny, right here, with us." He lifted his gaze, drawn into the depths of her compassionate eyes. He found no judgment, only unwavering acceptance. No fear, only the fragile bloom of hope. And for the first time in countless years, he dared to entertain the possibility that she might be right. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant growl of thunder, a primal drumbeat accompanying their fragile dance. He felt the suffocating weight of his history bearing down, the paralyzing fear of vulnerability, but an undeniable pull towards Clara, a deep-seated yearning for connection, surged within him. "I'm afraid, Clara," he whispered, the confession a raw and painful expulsion. "Afraid of failing you, of bringing harm." "So am I, Wade," she echoed, her own voice soft with vulnerability. "But sometimes, the things that terrify us the most are precisely those worth fighting for." He searched her face, seeing his own trepidation reflected in her gaze. Baring his soul to her was an enormous gamble, a wager with stakes higher than he'd ever imagined. Yet, he knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his bones, that he could no longer retreat. "Clara," he began, his voice thick with emotion. He faltered, the words catching in his throat, inadequate to convey the torrent of emotions, the burgeoning hope, the crippling fear, the aching need. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek with exquisite tenderness. "You don't need to say anything, Wade," she murmured, her eyes luminous. "I understand." But he needed to speak, to give voice to the truth that had taken root within him. "I care about you, Clara," he blurted out, the words tumbling forth in a rush. "More than I ever thought possible. I fought it, but I do." A single tear escaped, tracing a glistening path down her cheek, but a radiant smile bloomed on her face. "And I care about you too, Wade," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "More than words can express." He cradled her face in his calloused hands, his thumbs gently erasing the dampness. "I'm not worthy of you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with self-doubt. "Perhaps not," she conceded, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. "But perhaps I am worthy of you." He leaned closer, his gaze locking with hers, the air crackling with unspoken desires. He felt the warmth of her breath on his skin, her presence a beacon in the encroaching darkness. He knew this was a pivotal moment, a crossroads that would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. And then he kissed her. It was a tentative exploration, a hesitant merging of souls, a communion of vulnerability and hope. The kiss spoke of shared burdens and the promise of healing, of a connection forged in the crucible of danger and uncertainty. It was a seal, a silent pact made against the encroaching storm. When they parted, the storm was almost upon them, the wind howling through the trees. Yet, within the eye of that storm, on the weathered porch of the schoolhouse, they had discovered a haven, a sanctuary in each other's arms. "We will face whatever comes, together, Wade," Clara vowed, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. "We will defend this town. And we will defend each other." He nodded, a sense of purpose surging through him, eclipsing the shadows of the past. He wasn't merely fighting for Willow Bend anymore. He was fighting for Clara, for a future he had never dared to envision, for the chance to finally earn redemption. He drew her close, sheltering her from the fury of the elements. "Together," he breathed, his voice infused with a love he never believed himself capable of feeling. "Always?" The fragile quiet after their kiss exploded with a child's cry, a high-pitched wail that tore through the air. Clara recoiled from Wade, her blood running cold. "Emily!" she gasped, the name ripped from her throat. Then another shriek, this one a boy's, thick with terror. "Thomas!" The sound sent a jolt of pure, animalistic fear through Clara, a primal response Wade had never glimpsed. Gone was the vulnerability, replaced by a mother's ferocious shield. She was a lioness, ready to defend her own. They bolted toward the schoolhouse, the harrowing sounds their guide. Rounding the corner, Wade was met with a scene that stole his breath. Two of Blackwood's thugs, faces hidden behind bandanas, dragged Emily and Thomas toward a waiting wagon. The children, though small, battled with the desperation of trapped prey. A choked sob escaped Clara's lips. "Let them go!" she howled, her voice cracking. She lunged forward, but Wade's grip on her arm held her fast. "Clara, wait. We can't charge in blind." His tone was urgent, edged with a fear for her well-being that mirrored her own. But she was deaf to reason, her world shrinking to the two small figures being hoisted into the wagon. She wrenched free, her eyes blazing with furious resolve. "They're just kids, Wade. I have to do something." Before he could react, she surged towards the wagon, a whirlwind of maternal wrath. One of the masked men spotted her advance and swung up his rifle, the weapon catching the sun like a malevolent star. Wade moved on instinct. His revolver cleared leather, the familiar heft a grim comfort. He fired. The shot cracked, echoing in the abrupt silence that gripped the town. The rifleman bellowed, dropping his weapon as he clutched at his bleeding shoulder. The momentary lapse provided Clara her chance. Reaching the wagon, she seized Emily's hand, tugging with every ounce of her strength. But the other man countered, yanking the girl back with brutal force. "Get off her!" Clara shrieked, raking at his masked face with her nails. He shoved her back, sending her sprawling onto the dusty ground. Wade fired again, forcing the second man to duck for cover. He knew a clean shot was impossible with the children so close, but he could at least buy Clara a precious few seconds. He reached her side, hauling her to her feet. "Clara, we need to think." But her gaze remained riveted on the wagon as it jerked into motion, the children's cries fading with each turn of the wheels. It vanished down the road, leaving only a swirling cloud of dust and a stifling silence. Clara stood transfixed, her face a stark canvas of despair. Slowly, she turned to Wade, her eyes reflecting a pain that pierced him like a shard of ice. "They've taken them, Wade. My babies." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as tremors racked her body, sobs tearing from her throat. Words were hollow, useless against such grief. He simply held on, offering the meager solace of his presence. After an eternity, Clara pulled away, her face stained with tears, her eyes hardening with grim purpose. "We have to get them back," she whispered, her voice a thread of steel. "I know," Wade replied, his own resolve solidifying. He'd chase Blackwood to the ends of the earth if necessary. Those children would come home, not just for Clara's sake, but for his own. He'd spent years fleeing his past, running from the violence that clung to him, but now he had something worth fighting for, someone worth protecting. He met Clara's gaze, seeing her fear, and her fierce determination mirrored in his own heart. "We will get them back, Clara. I promise." He knew the task wouldn't be simple. Blackwood was a snake, slippery and well-connected. But Wade had stared down worse odds and lived. This time, he wasn't fighting for survival alone. He was fighting for Clara, for Emily and Thomas, for the soul of Willow Bend. He began to strategize, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. "How many men do you figure Blackwood commands?" Clara swallowed, struggling to regain her composure. "I don't know precise numbers, but he has eyes and ears everywhere. He probably took them to his main ranch." Wade nodded grimly. "Then that's our destination." He paused, his gaze softening on her tear-streaked face. "Clara, this will be a bloodbath. You can't come." Her eyes flashed with defiance. "Don't you dare, Wade Colton. Those are my family. I'm not cowering here while you risk your life." He sighed, knowing he'd already lost this battle. "All right, but you listen to me, every word. You do exactly as I say. No grandstanding, understand?" Clara gave a curt nod, her face set. Understood. He believed her. She was resilient, yes, but also quick-witted. She wouldn't jeopardize their chances with recklessness. He scanned the deserted town, his eyes like a hawk's, searching for any lingering threat. We need horses and firepower. Hemlock's livery is on the outskirts, Clara offered. Old man Hemlock, he will aid us. Wade nodded once. Let's move. And Clara? Yes? Prepare for a fight. It won't be a cakewalk. She met his gaze, her own a turbulent mix of trepidation and steely will. I am ready. Together they moved toward the livery stable, their footsteps echoing in the desolate street, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The sun beat down, painting long, distorted shadows that stretched before them like harbingers of darkness. The air hung heavy, thick with unspoken fear, broken only by the distant chirping of birds. As they pressed on, Wade couldn't shake the premonition that they were walking into a trap. Blackwood was no fool, and this abduction reeked of careful planning. But they had no choice but to press on. He had to reclaim those children, whatever the cost. He glanced at Clara, seeing the grief etched into her features. This was more than a rescue mission for her. It was a battle for her kin, for her future, for everything she held sacred. And he would be there, a bulwark against the storm. He would stand beside her, shielding her from harm, helping her reclaim what Blackwood had stolen. Because in that moment, as he strode beside her toward the looming unknown, Wade realized he was no longer just a lone wolf gunslinger. He was something more. He was a protector, an ally, and perhaps, dare he hope, something even deeper. He was a man with a reason to remain, a cause to champion, and a flickering belief in a future he'd long since abandoned. He would confront Blackwood and his army. He would guide Emily and Thomas home. And he would do it all for Clara. Gathering storm, a stifling stillness gripped Willow Bend, heavier than the dust devils that routinely spun across the arid plains. A chilling dread, akin to a viper's embrace, constricted the townsfolk, its venom spreading with each hour of the children's absence. Beside Wade, Clara stood unyielding, her face a rigid tableau of suppressed rage and stark terror emotions he knew all too well. Wade trod onto the saloon's porch, the aged wood protesting beneath his weight. The assembled townsfolk, clustered in the street, scrutinized him with a blend of apprehension and pleading hope. He was no badge-wearing officer, no shining paragon, merely a man fleeing a past that clung like grave clothes. Yet, seeing their faces, the raw alarm mirroring Clara's, he found himself unable to turn away. Blackwood wouldn't triumph. He cleared his throat, the rasping sound magnified in the oppressive air. Blackwood craves this town, he began, his voice gravelly, carried by the shifting breeze. He covets your land, your homes, your very existence, and he believes he can seize it because he smells weakness. He paused, letting the words resonate. He's abducted children. A transgression beyond any measure. A low rumble moved through the crowd, the tentative stirring of defiance. Old man Hemlock, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and weathered resilience, offered a trembling assessment. He's got too much firepower, Wade. Too many hired guns. We're outmatched. Wade's gaze swept the assembly, meeting each individual's stare, issuing a silent challenge. Perhaps. But he lacks what you possess. He lacks any true stake in this fight. You have your kin, your hearths, your tomorrows. He focused on Clara, her eyes locked on his, a wordless understanding passing between them. He snatched those children to break your spirit. Will you allow him? The silence stretched, thick with anticipation. Then, a voice, resonant and unwavering, sliced through the tension. It was Eli, the blacksmith, his usually mirthful features now set in a somber cast. "Wade speaks truth," he declared, stepping forward. "We can't permit Blackwood to ride roughshod over us any longer. We've been bending over backward, hoping he'd show restraint. But he won't. He'll bleed us dry." He slammed a fist against his leather apron. "I'm in. I'll stand and fight." Eli's words acted as kindling, igniting a fire in the townsfolk's resolve. Several others advanced, their faces grimly resolute. A farmer, his hands gnarled and powerful, a young woman who managed the mercantile, her eyes blazing with courage. Gradually, hesitantly, the crowd began to coalesce, fear receding before a burgeoning bravery. Wade felt a stirring he hadn't experienced in years. A fragile hope, not for himself, but for them. The burden of his past remained. The specters still haunted his sleep. But in that moment, gazing upon these people, he saw a possibility for something surpassing mere purdah. Survival. "All right," he said, his voice firming. "Here's the plan." He sketched out his strategy, a desperate play born of necessity and a white-hot desire to safeguard Clara and her community. He understood the odds were stacked against them, that they were outnumbered and outgunned, but also knew they held something Blackwood could never buy, a purpose worth risking everything for. As Wade spoke, Clara watched, a complex tapestry of emotions unfolding within her. Gratitude, certainly, for his willingness to take a stand, but also something more. Profound. Something that stirred a long-dormant ember within her. She saw the shadows in his eyes, the darkness that clung like a second skin, yet she also glimpsed a spark, a capacity for compassion, for steadfastness, perhaps even for affection. When Wade concluded, the townsfolk dispersed, their movements galvanized by a newfound conviction. Some went to secure weapons, others to reinforce their dwellings, still others to care for the injured. The air crackled with tension, interwoven with a sense of unity, a shared pledge to defend their home. Clara approached Wade, her gaze imbued with a quiet intensity. "Thank you," she said, her voice a mere thread, "for doing this for us." Wade shrugged, visibly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's not for you," he deflected, his voice rough. "It's for the children." Clara searched his gaze, seeing beyond the brusque exterior. "It's deeper than that, Wade," she observed softly. "I believe it is." He offered no reply, turning away to survey the horizon. He knew her words rang true. It extended beyond the children. It involved redemption, discovering a motive to fight for something beyond himself. It involved Clara and the promise she embodied. The sun began its descent, painting long shadows across the landscape. The sky wore a bruised purple hue, heavy with the impending threat of a storm. Wade felt it in his very core, a gathering tempest both internal and external. He anticipated days filled with brutality and bloodshed, yet he also knew they would face it together. He had little left to forfeit, yet perhaps, just perhaps, he had everything to gain. Eli approached, carrying a rifle and a handful of cartridges. "Ready when you are, Wade," he stated, his voice steady. Wade nodded, accepting the weapon. He checked the chamber, the familiar heft of the rifle settling reassuringly in his hands. He looked at Clara, her face pale but determined. "Stay safe," he murmured, his voice low. "You too," she responded, her eyes reflecting a blend of apprehension and hope. Wade turned and strode towards the town's perimeter, the approaching storm mirroring his internal turmoil. He was a gunslinger with a checkered past, but he was now a man with a cause, and he wouldn't allow Blackwood to strip him of it or to harm Clara. The battle for Willow Bend wind whipped grit swirled on the baked earth of Main Street as the sun hammered down, turning the wooden sidewalks into scorching platforms. Wade stood firm, a solitary figure silhouetted against the hastily reinforced facades. Tension hung thick, a silent scream trapped in the townsfolk's locked jaws and clenched fists. He tugged at his hat's brim, an almost imperceptible motion that belied the turmoil knotting his stomach. From the distance, 3 riders materialized, growing larger with each heartbeat. Blackwood's outriders, probing for weakness, testing the mettle of a town they already considered conquered. Behind him, Clara stood, her complexion ashen but her resolve unyielding. The anxiety etched on her face stemmed from her children's safety, from Willow Bend's preservation, not her own. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched a bod rifle, a tool far removed from her usual life. "Head back inside, Clara," Wade stated, his voice a low rasp. "This isn't your burden." She shook her head, her gaze fixed. "It is my burden, Wade. It's ours. We won't let him steal our lives." Her words, a fragile defiance against the gathering storm. The riders halted at the town's edge, their faces masks of callous indifference, their eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. The central figure, a massive man marred by a livid scar, bisecting his cheek, swung down from his mount. "Where's Colton?" he barked, his voice a thunderclap in the stillness. Blackwood demands words. Wade strode forward, his hand instinctively near his revolver's handle. "I am Colton. Tell Blackwood to collect his own damn words." The brute guffawed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Got some grit, old-timer. Pity it'll be your undoing." He spat, the gesture a blatant affront. "Blackwood's offering a chance to leave, pack up and flee Willow Bend. It'll be easier on all concerned." "We're not fleeing," Wade responded, his tone even, devoid of any inflection. "This is our community." The brute's eyes narrowed to slits. "Have it your way. But don't claim you weren't warned." With a curt nod, the riders wheeled their horses, vanishing back into the chimmering distance. Wade watched them depart, his senses sharpened. This was merely the opening skirmish. Blackwood wouldn't relinquish his claim readily. Turning to Clara, his expression became more serious. "They will return. Ready, everyone." The following hour seemed to stretch into an age, each tick of the clock a hammer blow. The townsfolk fortified windows, dragged furniture into position, and primed their weapons. The air vibrated with frayed nerves, a volatile mixture of dread and grit. Wade moved through them, offering concise encouragement, assigning posts, attempting to impose order on the spreading panic. He saw their fear reflected in their expressions, but also the stubborn spark of resistance, the refusal to yield. As twilight began to descend, casting the sky in shades of apricot and violet, they arrived. A rising curtain of dust heralded their approach, growing denser with each passing moment. Blackwood's contingent poured into Willow Bend like a plague of locusts, faces obscured by bandanas, rifles catching the last rays of light. "Hold your fire," Wade shouted, his command slicing through the mounting tension. "Wait for my signal," Blackwood's men fanned out, encircling the settlement, blocking every avenue of escape. They dismounted, taking cover behind wagons and buildings, their gazes darting, searching for targets. "Colton," Blackwood's voice resonated from the rear. "Confront me. I have no desire to harm these innocents." Wade stepped into the open, his silhouette stark against the dying sun. You care for no one but yourself, Blackwood. You're a charlatan and a looter. Blackwood's retort was a laugh devoid of warmth. You're naive, Colton. You imagine you can prevail against me? You're just one man. I'm not isolated, Wade countered, gesturing towards the townspeople peering from behind their defenses. We all stand here, and we're not surrendering. So be it, Blackwood declared, his tone turning hard. Annihilate them all. A cacophony erupted. Projectiles tore through the air, splintering timber and obliterating glass. The agonized cries of the wounded mingled with the deafening roar. Wade moved with economical efficiency, his revolvers becoming instruments of destruction, felling Blackwood's men with relentless precision. He sought refuge behind a toppled wagon, reloading, his mind a whirl of strategy and calculation. Clara stood beside him, discharging her rifle with unanticipated skill. He witnessed the determination in her eyes, the fierce protectiveness for her kin and her community. A feeling he thought was long extinguished surged within him. Optimism. The inhabitants fought with a ferocity that took even themselves by surprise. They were predominantly farmers and tradesmen, not seasoned fighters, yet they battled for their homes, for their families, for their very existence. They maintained their position, refusing to be cowed, refusing to be subdued. The skirmish raged for what seemed an eternity. Willow Bend's lanes became a horrifying tableau of ruin, strewn with bodies and wreckage. The atmosphere was thick with acrid smoke and the metallic tang of gunpowder. Wade spotted one of Blackwood's men outflanking Clara, raising his rifle to fire. He lunged, shoving her to the ground, intercepting the projectile aimed at her. Agony seared through his shoulder, yet he disregarded it, scrambling back to his feet and unleashing his revolver, eliminating the assailant. "Are you unharmed?" he asked Clara, his voice strained. She nodded, her eyes wide with the shock. "I'm safe, but you're injured." "It's inconsequential," he dismissed, skirting the injury. "Just remain vigilant." As the night deepened, Blackwood's cadre started to falter. They anticipated a swift victory, but they underestimated the staunch resilience of the townsfolk. They were fatigued, wounded, and disheartened. Wade recognized his moment. He galvanized the remaining defenders, initiating a counter-assault against Blackwood's command post. They surged forward, weapons blazing, voices lifted in a defiant battle cry. Blackwood's men crumbled, dissolving into the surrounding shadows. Blackwood remained isolated, his visage twisting with uncontrolled fury. He glared at Wade, his eyes burning with unadulterated hatred. "This chapter isn't concluded, Colton," he hissed. "I'll retaliate." Wade raised his revolver, leveling it at Blackwood's head. "Vacate Willow Bend, Blackwood, and never darken our doorway again. If you break this warning, I'll execute you." Blackwood hesitated, then spun on his heel and vanished into the night. The ensuing silence was profound. The townspeople emerged cautiously, their countenances smeared with grime and blood, their limbs aching with depletion. They surveyed the devastation, the bodies of their loved ones, and a wave of grief descended. Clara hurried to Wade's aid, examining his injury. "You require a physician," she said, her voice trembling with anxiety. "They can wait," he said, his gaze sweeping over the townspeople. "We must inter the fallen and care for the wounded." The next days passed in a haze of activity. The citizens banded together to remedy the carnage, to restore what had been lost, and to mourn their dead. Wade assisted where he could, his shoulder pulsing with pain, his spirit heavy with sorrow. He observed Clara attending to the injured, comforting those in mourning, and igniting a flicker of hope in the despairing. He saw the strength and tenacity that had initially drawn him to her. She was the heart and soul of Willow Bend, the reason he chose to stay and fight. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, Wade noticed Clara seated on the porch of the schoolhouse, gazing into the distance. He sat beside her, his silence a comforting presence. "Thank you, Wade," she expressed quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You rescued us. We salvaged ourselves," he countered, meeting her gaze. "You reminded me what it means to battle for something worthy." She offered a smile, tentative but genuine. "You're no longer wandering, Wade. You're one of us." He looked at her, at the warmth radiating from her eyes, at the budding romance between them. She spoke the truth. He found a sanctuary in Willow Bend, a purpose in safeguarding its inhabitants, and a love he never deemed possible. As the first stars emerged, he reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "I'm not leaving, Clara," he affirmed, his voice resonating with conviction. "I'm here for good." The weight on his soul felt lighter than it had in years, as if a long winter was finally releasing its grip. The old injuries. Confrontation. Clara surfaced into a world of throbbing pain. Her temple, where Blackwood's man had landed his blow, flared with each pulse, but the ropes at her wrists were already yielding to the chair's jagged edge. She bit back a groan, focusing instead on the abrasive sign. Fragments of terror assaulted her. The children's wan faces, Wade's lone figure against insurmountable odds. The memory of his quiet fortitude spurred her onward. He couldn't confront Blackwood's fury alone. The final strand snapped. Clara snatched the fallen knife, her fingers wrapping around its cool handle. She slipped through the saloon's rear, emerging into the bedlam that Willow Bend had become. Gunshots rang out, voices clamored, and the air reeked of burnt powder and kicked-up dust. She caught glimpses of townsfolk farmers, merchants standing shoulder to shoulder with Wade, their expressions set in grim determination. A resistance Blackwood hadn't factored into his equation. Her gaze darted around, searching for Wade, finally finding him at the town's edge, locked in a ferocious standoff with Blackwood himself. They circled each other warily, pistols pointed low, faces carved from granite. Blackwood, for all his wealth and influence, appeared shaken, his usual swagger replaced by a flicker of desperation. Wade, conversely, possessed an unsettling calm, his focus unwavering, his movements economical. Clara knew she had to tip the scales. Clutching the knife, she sprinted toward them, threading through the chaos, her pulse a frantic drumbeat. "Wade!" she cried, her voice a mere breath against the storm of sounds. He flicked a glance her way, surprise quickly overtaken by concern. "Clara, fall back," he yelled, but she pressed on, closing the gap. Blackwood, momentarily distracted by Clara's arrival, stumbled in his stance. It was all the opening Wade needed. In a lightning-fast maneuver, he delivered a sharp kick to Blackwood's wrist, sending the man's pistol skittering across the ground. Blackwood roared, a sound of pure rage, and launched himself at Wade, fists balled. They grappled, their bodies colliding against the aged clapboard of a nearby building. Clara watched, a knot of fear twisting in her stomach, as they wrestled, each strike fueled by years of simmering animosity. Wade was strong, but Blackwood outweighed him, his bulk a distinct advantage. He muscled Wade off balance, sending him crashing to the dirt. Blackwood leered down, his face a mask of pure venom. "Think you can just waltz in and take what's mine?" he spat, raising a fist to strike. "Play the hero, do you?" Wade, bloodied and bruised, met Blackwood's gaze with an unyielding, icy resolve. "Nothing here belongs to you," he growled, his voice rough. "You can't own people, Blackwood, and you sure as hell can't own this town." Blackwood's laugh was a harsh rasp. I can do anything I please. He swung, aiming a brutal blow for Wade's head. Clara screamed, but before the fist connected, Wade twisted aside, narrowly avoiding the impact. He scrambled upward, moving with a surprising litheness despite his injuries. He fixed Blackwood with a stare, his eyes pools of ancient pain, deeper than any physical wound. It was the burden of his past, the weight of lives extinguished, the ghost of the man he once was. I used to believe I was a lost cause, he murmured, barely audible, that I was beyond redemption. He flicked a glance at Clara, his expression softening, before hardening as he turned back to Blackwood. I was wrong. I found something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. He surged forward, driven by a newfound purpose, a fierce longing to shield the woman he loved, the town he'd come to embrace as his own. The force of his assault took even him by surprise. Each blow connected with brutal precision, forcing Blackwood backward, reeling. Blackwood, his face a grotesque tapestry of blood and swelling, faltered, his eyes widening with disbelief. He'd never encountered such a foe, a man fueled by something more profound than mere survival. Wade pressed his advantage, unleashing a final cascade of strikes, each a testament to his revitalized resolve, a declaration of his commitment to a brighter future. Blackwood crumpled, hitting the dirt with a jarring thud. He lay there, struggling for air, his gaze a mixture of agony, shock, and utter defeat. Wade stood over him, chest heaving, body trembling with the aftermath of battle. He could have ended it there, snuffed out Blackwood's life without a second thought. But he held back. Killing Blackwood wouldn't mend the past, wouldn't resurrect those he'd harmed. He holstered his weapon and turned to Clara, his eyes filled with mingled relief and weariness. She rushed into his arms, clinging to him, burying her face against his chest. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved everyone." Wade embraced her tightly, feeling the comforting warmth of her body against his. He had saved them, yes, but in the process, he had also reclaimed himself. He had confronted his demons and emerged victorious. He'd discovered salvation in the most unexpected place, within the embrace of a woman who had shown him the true meaning of hope. His gaze swept over the townspeople, their faces alight with gratitude. They had fought courageously, united, and they had prevailed. They had defended their homes, their community, their way of life. Blackwood stood, groaning in agony. Wade looked down at him, his expression unreadable. "Get out of Willow Bend, Blackwood," he stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "And never return." Blackwood, hatred burning in his eyes, glared at Wade. He tried to rise, but his body betrayed him. He spat on the ground, then slowly, painfully, began to crawl away, disappearing into the encroaching shadows. The townspeople watched him retreat, their faces a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. They had faced their oppressor and emerged triumphant. They had proven that even the smallest communities could stand against the mightiest of adversaries. As twilight painted the sky, casting long silhouettes across Willow Bend's dusty roads, Wade stood beside Clara, watching as the townspeople began clearing the debris and tending to the wounded. The scent of gunpowder lingered in the air, yet it was mingled with a sense of renewal, the conviction that things were about to change. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. There would still be hurdles to overcome, difficulties to navigate, but he also knew they wouldn't face them alone. They had each other, and they had the unwavering support of the community that had captured his heart. He looked at Clara, her eyes radiant with love and appreciation. He had come to Willow Bend seeking refuge, a place to escape the ghosts of his past. Instead, he had found something infinitely more precious: a sanctuary, a family, and a love that possessed the power to heal the deepest scars. He took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. He was no longer a wanderer, a gunslinger with nothing to forfeit. He was a man with a purpose, a man with a future. He was a man who had finally found a reason to remain. And he knew, with unwavering conviction, that he would never leave her side. A new dawn dust motes danced in the air, slowly revealing Silas Blackwood, a crumpled heap of expensive tailoring and simmering fury. His rifle lay discarded, reflecting the dying light with cold indifference. The air, moments before a cacophony of gunfire and terror, now hummed with a tentative quiet, a fragile promise of peace. Wade, Colt still in hand, watched Clara rush towards him, relief sculpting her features. He lowered the weapon, its weight suddenly a burden. "You all right?" The question rasped from his throat. Clara's trembling fingers found his. "I am now," she breathed, her gaze searching his depths. "Thank you, Wade." A wave of collective breath rippled through the crowd, blossoming into a cheer that reverberated through the valley. The townspeople, released from Blackwood's oppressive grip, surged forward, their faces illuminated by a freedom they'd ceased to believe in. Freed from their makeshift tabora. Prison. The children swarmed Clara, their faces canvases of dirt and lingering fright. They burrowed into her skirts, small tremors still racking their bodies, their eyes reflecting a nascent hope. Kneeling, Clara enveloped them in Breben, her embrace, her own tears a balm to their fear. "It's all right," she soothed, her voice thick with emotion. "It's over." The townsfolk hoisted Wade onto their shoulders, chanting his name, a roaring chorus of gratitude. He surveyed the faces below, a bewildered gratitude blooming in his chest. Wade Colton, a man who'd spent a lifetime shunning connection, was being lauded as a hero, a savior. The unfamiliar sensation threatened to drown him. He noticed Sarah Miller, beaming, sheltering her younger brother. Old Mr. Henderson, the blacksmith, offered a watery salute, his face etched with relief. He saw his own nascent hope mirrored in their joyful countenances. Yet, amidst the jubilant throng, his gaze kept returning to Clara. She stood apart, still encircled by the children, radiating a quiet joy. He observed the worry lines etched around her eyes, the lingering shadows of past sorrows, but also a granite strength, a resilience he'd previously underestimated. She was a woman tempered by adversity, yet still clinging to her faith in humanity's inherent goodness. The leaden weight of his past threatened to pull him under, the specters of violence and loss whispering insidious doubts. He'd always been a drifter, a solitary figure haunted by ghosts. However, seeing Clara, the liberated children, and the welcoming townspeople, a novel thought bloomed. Could he carve a different destiny? Blackwood, still writhing on the dirt, was hauled to his feet by his remaining lackeys, a storm of frustrated rage contorting his face, his eyes burning with malice. He fixed Wade with a venomous glare. "This isn't finished, Colton," he hissed. "You haven't seen the last of me." Wade met his gaze, unflinching. "Leave Willow Bend, Blackwood," he warned, his tone a low growl, "and never return." Blackwood, assessing the implacable resolve in Wade's eyes and the unwavering support of the town, recognized his immediate defeat, however temporary. He allowed his men to escort him away, his impotent threats fading into the celebrating air. As the celebratory fervor washed over Willow Bend, Wade slipped away from the crowd, seeking solitude to process the seismic shifts within him. He gravitated taper-tater towards the outskirts, towards the old oak where his path had first converged with Clara's. Beneath its sprawling branches, the rough bark offered a small comfort against his back. The setting sun painted the landscape with fiery hues. He closed Caparain, his eyes, attempting to quell the churning emotions. His father, a man of integrity, felled prematurely. His mother, succumbing to grief. Years spent wandering the West, seeking escape from a persistent ache, searching for a reason to persevere. Then, Clara, her indomitable spirit, her boundless empathy, the children, beacons of innocence and hope, the townspeople, their collective courage and enduring resilience. He opened his eyes, fixed on the horizon, now azure, canvas of blazing orange, rose, and gold. He inhaled deeply, the air filling his lungs with a sense of tranquility unknown for years. He understood what he needed to do. Returning to town, his steps possessed a newfound certainty. He found Clara tending a minor abrasion on a child's arm. She looked up, her eyes questioning. "Clara," he began, his voice steady. "I'm staying." Her eyes widened, revealing a blend of surprise and burgeoning joy. "Staying?" she echoed, barely audible. He nodded. "I'm finished running," he confessed. "Finished being alone. I want to be part of this town, part of your life." Tears streamed down her face, tears of pure, unadulterated happiness, her fingers entwined with his. "I'm so glad, Wade," she choked out, overcome with emotion. "So very glad." He squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with an emotion he'd considered unattainable. He scanned the town, the faces of the people who'd embraced him with open arms. He envisioned a future brimming with purpose, a future built alongside Clara. The celebration continued late into the night, but Wade and Clara found themselves drawn to the schoolhouse, a testament to the town's enduring spirit, a symbol of unwavering hope. They sat on the porch, watching the celestial display. The night air carried the distant sounds of music and revelry, but they were content in their shared silence, their hands intertwined. "What will you do now?" Clara inquired softly. Wade shrugged. "Don't know," he admitted. "Perhaps assist Mr. Henderson at the forge. Maybe learn to cultivate the land. Maybe just be a citizen." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "You'll be whatever you desire, Wade," she said. "You've earned it." He met her gaze, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Clara," he declared. "You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to contend." She rested her head upon his shoulder, a comforting touch that sent a pleasant tremor through him. "We gave each other a reason, Wade," she countered. "We were both in need." They lingered in companionable silence, captivated by the night sky and the distant sounds of celebration. Finally, Wade rose, drawing Clara up with him. "Come on," he said. "Let's rejoin the celebration." Hand in hand, they walked towards the heart of town, towards the music and laughter, towards their shared future, their new beginning. The past would remain a part of them, a shadow lurking in the periphery, but it would no longer dictate their course. They discovered solace in their shared bond, a mutual strength to overcome any impediment. They'd found sanctuary in Willow Bend, a place to truly belong, a place to discover happiness. As they merged with the jubilant crowd, Wade glanced back at the schoolhouse, at the small beacon of light flickering in its window. He knew the path ahead would be arduous, fraught with challenges. But he also knew he was no longer alone. He had Clara at his side, the children to protect, and the steadfast support of the townspeople. He had a purpose, a reason to embrace life. He was no longer a lone gunslinger with nothing to lose, but a man with everything to gain. Legacy of Hope time, a relentless current like the river meandering past Willow Bend, pressed onward. The stark reminders of Silas Blackwood's tyranny had mellowed, softened by the townsfolk's diligent efforts and an indomitable spirit of resurgence. Homes arose anew, fences were repaired, and fields replanted, each act a vibrant declaration of their collective strength. Wade, shed of his spectral existence, discovered solid roots in this revitalized community. He labored alongside them, his weathered hands adept at carpentry, his quiet fortitude a balm. He assisted in raising the new schoolhouse, its timbers robust and true, a glowing promise for the rising generation. Clara, a lingering sorrow for her brother still coloring her eyes, emanated a newfound power. Her devotion poured into teaching, nurturing young minds with unwavering commitment. The schoolhouse throbbed with energy, a chorus of youthful voices learning to decipher words and craft sentences, their joyous sounds resonating through the valley. Though the pain of loss never fully vanished, it now found equilibrium in the delight she gleaned from their blossoming minds and the steadfast affection she shared with Wade. Wade's metamorphosis was perhaps the most striking. The haunted look that had once veiled his gaze dissipated, yielding to a warmth mirroring his affection for Clara and the children. He gravitated toward them, drawn to their candid glee and boundless vitality. He wasn't their father in blood, yet his presence was a constant, a protector, a guiding hand when they faltered. Clara's niece, Lily, often sought his company, her tiny hand nestling within his as they strolled along the river's edge. Her nephew, Thomas, a spirited boy with a mischievous spark, barraged him with inquiries about the world beyond Willow Bend, his eyes gleaming with wonder. Wade responded with patience, sharing tales of his wanderings, while underscoring the significance of home, of belonging, of the love that bound their hearts together. One brilliant autumn afternoon, as the leaves burst into a kaleidoscope of crimson and gold, Wade assisted Thomas in erecting a treehouse within the sprawling oak that stood guard over Clara's backyard. Thomas hammered with fervent zeal, his tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in intense focus. "Wade," he queried, pausing to wipe his brow, "did you ever imagine you'd settle down in one place for so long?" Wade chuckled, lines radiating from the corners of his eyes. "Never thought I'd stay put anywhere, son. But life has a way of throwing curveballs." His gaze drifted towards the house, where Clara tended the garden, her laughter mingling with Lily's as they pursued butterflies amidst the vibrant blooms. "Some treasures are worth holding on to." Thomas grinned, understanding dawning on his face. He sensed, in his youthful wisdom, the connection between Wade and Clara, the silent vows that permeated the air. He knew that Wade had discovered a sanctuary, not merely in Willow Bend, but within their family, bathed in their love. Later that evening, the children tucked snugly in their beds. Wade and Clara sat on the porch, their silence a comfortable understanding. The cosmos blazed above, a scattering of brilliant gems on the velvety tapestry of night. Clara rested her head against Wade's shoulder, hand nestled in his. "They're fortunate to have you," she murmured, her voice soft and brimming with emotion. "You've brought them a sense of safety they hadn't known since their father passed." Wade enveloped her with his arm, drawing her nearer. "They've gifted me something too, Clara. An incentive to strive for better. A purpose to remain." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me everything. Clara raised her gaze, her eyes meeting his in the mellow moonlight. We've enriched each other, Wade. We've cultivated a life here, a family. We've forged a legacy of hope, a testament to the fortitude of love and forgiveness. A fleeting darkness crossed Wade's features, a subtle reminder of the shadows lurking within. Blackwood still roams, he said, his voice hushed. He hasn't forgotten Willow Bend. Clara squeezed his hand, her touch reassuring. We'll confront him together, Wade. We always do. And we'll triumph, because we possess something he lacks. We have each other. And we have this town. We have hope, the ember that refuses to die. The ensuing years were not without trials. The terrain was unforgiving, the elements capricious, and the specter of Silas Blackwood persisted. Yet, through it all, the denizens of Willow Bend persevered, their spirits unyielding. They united, bolstering each other, their shared strength amplified by the affection and unwavering loyalty that bound their community. Wade and Clara stood at the helm, their love a guiding light, their resolute dedication a wellspring of inspiration. Wade embraced his role as a father figure to Lily and Thomas, imparting the skills of horsemanship, the art of hunting, and the means of self-defense. He instilled a sense of justice, a reverence for the land, and a deep appreciation for the value of community. He shared tales of his past, not to glorify violence, but as cautionary parables, reminders of the choices that lie ahead. Clara continued to pour her heart into the schoolhouse, cultivating young minds for the future. She taught not only literacy and numeracy, but also empathy, compassion, and the courage to stand up for what is right. She urged them to dream boldly, to believe in their potential, and to never relinquish hope even when faced with adversity. Years later, Wade and Clara stood hand in hand on their porch, watching Lily and Thomas, now young adults, playing with their own children in the yard. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over the valley, painting the sky in swaths of coral, rose, and violet. The air was alive with the sound of merriment, the harmonious symphony of a family flourishing, a community thriving. Wade turned to Clara, his eyes brimming with love and gratitude. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We built a life here. We created something that will last." Clara smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "We did, Wade. We did." They stood in contemplative silence, their hearts overflowing, their souls intertwined. They had sought solace in Willow Bend, a chance at redemption. And they had discovered it, not only in each other, but in the revitalized community, the family they had nurtured, the enduring legacy of hope they had bequeathed. The gunslinger who once had nothing to lose discovered everything he ever yearned for, everything he ever needed, within the embrace of the woman who believed in him, in the town that had taken him in the transformative power of love. As they watched the children frolic, their laughter echoing through the valley, they understood that their love would endure, a testament to resilience, a beacon of second chances. Their love was a dawn, dispelling the shadows of yesterday, illuminating the path to a brighter tomorrow, a tomorrow brimming with affection, laughter, and the constant promise of a fresh start.